My guest today is Samuele Furfari.
First of all, it's nice to be with you, all the participants, and with you, Tom. I start my studies in chemical engineering. And after that, I made a Ph.D., and it was at the end of the 70s, where everybody was afraid for the lack of oil in the future. And so I made my Ph.D. On coal conversion into liquids. It was a research financed by the European Commission, because at that time, everybody was trying to find alternative solution. So alternative solutions are not new. It's an old story. You see, I'm quite old, so it's an old story. In the meantime, I was also assistant in the chemical engineering at the Polytechnic School in Brussels. And at the end of my PhD, I joined the European Commission because they were looking for people working on alternative energies. And so I entered in the European Commission in 1982, and I work in DG Energy for 36 years. I am teaching also energy geopolitics since 20 years, most of the time in Brussels, but also now in Madrid and London. And I'm passionate about energy. I think that it's all what I can say for the time being.
All right. And you have written 18 books on the subject, correct?
Yes. I started in 2008 with 2 books for my student. It was textbook for the student with all the details that an engineer need to know about energy. It was in French. And then I work a new edition in English. And progressively, I wrote other books also. And now the last one is Energy Insecurity, which has been published 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, and as I said before we hit record here, I've been tweeting out highlights from that book, from the Kindle version of that book. There's a lot of good stuff in there. I commend you for that book. I enjoyed it. Yeah. Do you want to tell us about your work with the European Commission? You were advising them on energy.
Yes, in 36 years, you move in the administration. So I've worked in many topics, in technology, in fuel cell, in hydrogen, a lot of time on hydrogen. I work on policies, on sustainable development, climate change, renewable energy, energy efficiency, communication, information, energy management with local authorities. I developed the concept of addressing energy policy at the level of local authorities, cities, regions, and so on. And I finished my career in the European Commission as an advisor to the General Director.
And would you say that the EU was sort of sane on energy through maybe 2016 and sort of went nuts after that, or what do you think?
Yes, in the sense that the EU has been created in the 50s with one big scope: to bring peace among European countries. And the idea was, if we want to have peace among countries, we need to share energy. Because if you don't share energy, there are tensions between countries. Indeed, it is what happens in the Versailles Treaty in 1919, when the Allies that win the First World War obliged Germany to cut drastically its energy consumption. And we end up to have the Second World War, because without energy, there is no development. And so the EU has been created for that, to promote peace through the use of energy. And the aim was to try to have cheap and abundant energy. This was the slogan: cheap and abundant energy. And for 60 years, we work on that. And we get good results, to the point that we have been able to cope with the attack of OPEC countries in the 70s, and we have been able to respond and to not to be limited in our growth at that time. But since 5 years or so, the slogan is no more cheap and abundant energy, but decarbonization. That means stopping to use energy as much as possible, because 81% of the energy is fossil fuel. That means if you talk about decarbonization, means indeed limiting energy consumption, which is the contrary of the initial idea of the EU.
So the subtitle of your book is The Organized Destruction of the EU's Competitiveness. Do you think what is really going on here? These people actually think they're going to prevent bad weather with these energy choices, or what is going on?
Energy is the blood circulating in the arteria of the economy. Without energy, there is no economy, no prospect, no progress, no technology development. And when you say that you need to degrowth, that means you need to reduce energy consumption, that means to reduce the growth. And indeed, it's becoming more and more evident in the EU, in Brussels and Strasbourg, that the final aim is to degrowth, to stop development. And of course, they present that as something very sympathetic. You know, we want to protect the nature, we want to protect the bird, we want to protect the atmosphere. But the final aim of all that is to limit growth. And if you limit growth, you condemn your economy. And it's why I'm saying that indeed this energy insecurity created by the EU is nowadays a very big threat for the economy of the EU and its industry. You know, the problem is that industry at one moment can decide to leave the EU. If it is becoming too expensive, too risky, and too difficult with legislation, they can leave and go in another country and continue to produce. Citizens cannot, or will not, at least not sufficiently. And therefore, we are going to have big problem in the future if the industry leave and people remain here.
And that is happening already? Some industries are leaving?
Yes, some industry are already leaving, of course, particularly the chemical industry, because we do not realize, but Europe was probably the leader in chemical industry. And amongst Europe, Germany was the leader, of course, in Europe as a chemical industry country. And with the problem that they have nowadays on energy, they close plants in Germany and they open in other countries.
Are there some individual countries in the EU that have more sane energy policy, or do they have to, everybody has to do whatever the EU tells them to do?
That's a good question. Let's talk about the fundamental. The treaty, Article 194 of the EU treaty, say explicitly that the member states are free to choose their energy mix and to exploit their own resources. That means that Brussels cannot impose to a country what to do. This is the theory. But in practice, through decarbonization, which apply to everybody, and also to the management of financing, Brussels is trying to put pressure on some countries, which are, I would not say reluctant, but they say, we have our own energy, why should we stop it? And it is particularly the case for Poland. Poland very wisely organized itself to abandon the import of gas or oil from Russia. It was foreseen that the contract with Russia will arrive to a term, and so they plan to import gas from other countries, and for that they created a terminal in Strenice near the German border, to import gas. And they connected also with Norway to import gas. And they continue to use their own coal, hard coal in Silesia. There is coal which is quite competitive, and they want to continue to burn. 75% of electricity in Poland is produced by coal. And so you see the contradiction. The treaty tells clearly that Poland is entitled to do so, but the Commission put pressure in saying you will not save the planet. And so the Polish government and other governments do not agree with that. And there is a strong resistance from them.
All right. And would you say that maybe Germany is on the other end of the spectrum in terms of insane energy policy in Europe?
Sadly, you are right, Tom, very sadly. You know, I have a lot of consideration for German people and German industry. And so it's a great nation with strong capacities and working hard, brilliant technician. And it's very shocking to see such an important country having, as you have said, insane policy. That's quite surprising. You imagine they had a very efficient, safe, amortized nuclear power plant, and they close it. That's incredible. And in the meantime, they say that they want to replace that with windmill and solar panel. But this is a joke. Incredible. How is it possible that such a bright country makes such a ridiculous statement that wind will be able to replace nuclear energy? And in the meantime, they continue to burn coal, or lignite is even worse. And this will continue until 2038. And they say that they want to reduce the CO2 emissions. But furthermore, they rely so much on Russian gas that they are now in a total great difficulty because Russian gas is not flowing anymore. And they were refusing, that's very incredible, they refused to build one single LNG terminal. Because the argument of the Green was, if we build an LNG terminal, then gas will arrive, and we do not want to have gas. But they have gas from Russia. Very insane, indeed.
So there is no movement there on LNG terminals? They're not going to build them? Or?
Yes, of course. No, they are reacting. They are building an LNG terminal. Indeed, they knew that they need an LNG terminal, but finally they got one which is finished and the other one in construction. But it is not a real LNG terminal like it is most of the case in the other country. It's a floating terminal, which is quite different. It's a boat, so with limited capacity, because a real terminal, you have the reservoir on shore and not offshore. So it's good, but quite limited.
So why aren't they building a real terminal?
That's a good question. You can ask them.
I was also going to ask about those nuclear plants that they have. Can they bring them back up, or have they bulldozed them down? I mean, can they change their mind and get them running again pretty easily or not?
It's possible. It's possible, but you should not wait years to do that. But look in Japan, after the tsunami, they shut down all the plants, and for 7 or 8 years, and so they start again. So it's not impossible, provided you stop dismantling. If you start to dismantle, then it's different. But if it is on shelf, you can restart, of course. And I hope that there will be election, I think, next year, or 2 years. And then maybe a new government can have a different vision. It's not impossible that they return to nuclear energy. At least it is sound to do so.
That just reminds me that in the UK, wasn't there a case not long ago where some politician had himself filmed pushing down a plunger while they blew up a coal plant? Like he's so heroic for preventing bad weather. So they can't use that coal plant anymore. It's amazing. Yeah.
Yes, it's amazing. Germany, UK was using a lot of coal, and then because the coal was not economic, they closed the plant. The power plant, coal-fired power plants have been closed in UK because the coal was not economic. But Germany have a lot of very cheap coal mine. It's not the same as in UK. It's not underground. It's an open cast mine, and it is lignite, very easy to dig. And so it is very competitive to produce electricity with lignite, extremely competitive. And it's why they decide not to abandon and to produce CO2.
Right. I'm going to read a quote from your book that I think is really good. Quote, the rest of the world, in clear opposition to the EU, is rushing towards conventional energy. Isolated in its utopian race for renewables, the EU will eventually have to admit that it has taken the wrong path and will have to return to the original one, providing cheap and abundant energy to citizens and industry, end quote. So when do you think that's going to happen? That you think in the next few years, sanity will return and they will go back to real energy in the EU?
Yeah, a few months ago, I was quite pessimistic, saying that we will need a few years to change the mind. But recently, I become much more optimistic. Why? Because we see a lot of sign in many countries that governments start to be reluctant to continue into this direction. Just an example of this weekend. In Germany, the government decided to abandon the target for CO2 emission in sectors. The government was ready to take a global target for Germany and then sectorial target for transport, for heating, for electricity and services and so on. And they decided a few days ago that it will be only one target without entering into the details of the sector. Why? Because it's too expensive. Why should we reduce the CO2 emission in the air transport, when the air transport represents 3 to 4% of the CO2 emission? But the Green were saying that everybody have to do the job and reduce by the same number. So this was really impossible. You can do that for an industry or even domestic purpose if you have good, efficient houses, modern houses, but not for airplanes. So this is one thing. Second thing, France have resisted the pressure of Austria and Germany to exclude nuclear energy in the hydrogen production. And France was insisting, but if the aim is to produce hydrogen with non-CO2 energy, why do you want to exclude nuclear? And at the end, also, Friday, the European Council decided that, yes, we can accept nuclear to be green if it is to produce hydrogen. There are a lot of small things which are happening that give some hope that on the 9th of June 2024, when there will be European election, something can change, because it's becoming very expensive for citizens, for industry. And so, in policy, things can change rapidly. It can take years, but sometimes it can go very quickly. And I hope that in 1 year time, we will be in a different situation.
Interesting. From my perspective, it looks like we have passed peak climate hysteria in the world. It looks like we're past the peak, and I'm really hoping that it can crumble quickly from here. But you think
this morning, it's nice that you are saying that, because this morning I wrote an article green peak. Green peak, saying that people have always discussed about the peak of oil, but indeed what we are seeing is a peak of greens, because people start to say, well, that's enough with those side of things. It's becoming very expensive. To the point that in the European Parliament last week, they start to oppose to a proposal of the European Commission on restoring nature. The idea was that we should restore the nature as it was before the Industrial Revolution. Many countries are opposing. The Commission for Agriculture opposed, the Commission for Fishing opposed, and the Commission for Environment is just in parity. That means that even in the Environment Commission in the Parliament, there is no strong support of this idea.
Oh, glad to hear it. All right. I wanted to read another quote from your book that I enjoyed. Quote, the ExxonMobil algae humiliation. After spending some $350 million on the development of algae biofuels, including $60 million on advertising in 2023, they have thrown in the towel, and the dream has faded because algae technologies are not yet ready for deployment. That's interesting to me because I've seen a lot of those ads over here in the U.S. that, hey, we're going to save the world with algae. And that must be a pretty recent development that I had not heard of, that they threw in the towel.
You know, it's nice to make research. Not only nice, it's a necessity.
Yes.
It's a necessity to make research. And so before starting a research, you cannot say no. But if you don't have result, one day you have to say, okay, it's enough. I spent enough. And it's my case with my PhD. I made a PhD in transformation of coal into oil product. We try. It's working, but it's not economic. So we stop. And it's the same thing with a lot of stuff in the biofuels. Let's try, but we finance a lot of all this since 2008. And so it's time to say, okay, it's not working. And so I think that you know, it's always difficult to admit that we were wrong, but we should not be afraid to say that we are wrong in research. It's normal. Only a few % of the research give results. So accept that, yes, we are wrong in making some research, but we doesn't know it before.
Yeah, I'm all for the research, but I do think it was a little early to spend $60 million advertising how successful they were before they actually got it working.
Yes, but you know, this is because industry want to appear green. Green is a real marketing slogan. You see that everything is green today, everything. Even Exxon, in the airport in Brussels, there is a big advertisement of Exxon saying that they will save the planet with their electronic. That's very exaggeration, but yes, everybody's doing that. And so not only Exxon, but even BP have advertised a lot on biofuel. So it's normal they try to show that they are green, but at the end, it's a small part of their budget to appear green.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of other companies, like maybe Patagonia, they're making clothes, and somehow the way they do that is going to prevent bad weather. There's all sorts of ridiculous claims, as you know.
Yes, of course. Yeah. There is even an advertisement in Japan of ice cream saying that ice cream is good to cool down and to save the planet.
I wonder what % of people actually buy that. I guess that they buy that argument.
Yeah, but I think that people buy, you know, because there is a real brainwashing today. Everything, always repeating and repeating and repeating, and people follow, of course. This is the aim of the propaganda.
Okay, let's see. Do you have any more books in the hopper that you're going to write?
Yes, I'm preparing the number 2 of this series on it will be on energy security. You mentioned energy insecurity, and I'm working on energy security, explaining how to ensure to have security of supply. This is a mess. Without security of supply, it's a disaster. We stop everything if there is a blackout. So we need to pay attention to security of supply. And I want to show in this book that nuclear energy is in strong development everywhere in the world except Germany. New technologies, new project, a lot of fight in the geopolitics, because of course Russia would like to control that, but China also. And there is interesting development with new nuclear reactor. But the same also with fossil fuel. Fossil fuel is not finished. When you see the huge investment occurring everywhere in the planet, except EU, it's quite encouraging to see that, yes, they want to produce cheap and abundant energy. Just one example. You know that Israel now is a gas producer. It's a big surprise that Israel can produce gas. In the Mediterranean Sea, they have two major fields producing, Tamar and Leviathan, and other are in preparation. Can you imagine that ADNOC, the company of Emirates, is investing in Israel to produce gas? It's a strong sign that the geopolitics have changed, and the people who know that there is a future for fossil fuel are investing even in Israel. Arab country investing in Israel. Qatar Energy is investing in Texas to produce more gas. And another example is quite surprising, is that Qatar Energy, storage nowadays, because they produce a lot of gas, is investing in Texas, in Golden Pass project. So you see, it's quite strange that the president of the commission say that there is no future for gas, and Qatar Energy is investing in Texas to produce more gas.
Very interesting. All right. What do you think the world's going to look like, let's say, in 2050 energy-wise? How different will it be in terms of the energy sources that are used around the world?
I'm sorry to say that there will be a massive development of conventional energy. When I say conventional energy, I mean oil, gas, coal, hydroelectricity, and nuclear. We will continue to use that massively. If people want to develop, and you know that there is a lack of development in Africa and a big part of Asia, so it's impossible to do that without energy. One element to clarify that the physical notion of energy is the same physical notion of work. Energy is work and work is energy. It's measured with the same unit, joule. To measure the work, you use joule. To measure energy, you use joule, because it's the same thing. So more people in the world, more willingness to develop, to create richness, quality of life, good health, good food. You need to work, and therefore you need to have energy. And of course, it will not be with wind and solar. This is ridiculous. It's ridiculous to believe that the world will continue to develop with something which represents, for time being, 3%. Wind and solar energy in Europe and also in the world represent 3% of the primary energy demand. So you cannot become 100% of a larger demand of energy. So in 20 years, 25 years, in 2050, we will have more fossil fuel and more nuclear and more hydro. More solar also, and more wind, of course, also more renewable, but more of all the type of energy.
So you are optimistic that in Africa, for example, that the people, I think they're the bad guys that are trying to prevent the Africans from getting reliable energy, and they need to power the country on wind and solar. You think that they will prevail, the sanity will prevail in Africa, and they will have abundant, reliable energy?
I strongly wish that, and I believe that it will be the case. When I start to realize the dramatic situation in Africa, I wrote a book. It's one of my book, and the urgency to electrify Africa. It's in French, but the title is The Urgency to Electrify Africa. It's urgent to electrify Africa, because if there is no massive consumption of electricity, the country will not develop. You know, for the time being, only with big differences, only 50% of the African are connected to the grid. In some case, it's a few percent of the population, like in Sudan. One of the richest country in the world in terms of resources is Congo. In Congo, 18% of the population is connected to the grid. How do you expect that this country will develop? Of course, they need a new power plant. And if we are not able to do more than the 3%, why do you expect that African will do more than we do? So they start to realize that. I wrote an article last year during the COP27 saying that I hope that in the COP, African countries will react. And then indeed, you have seen that African countries have not accepted anymore to have imposition of targets in COP. And the president of Uganda wrote an article in Newsweek explaining what I'm telling you, that it's enough, let us develop. You know that the chairman of the next COP, the COP28, will be the CEO of ADNOC, the company of Emirates, because the meeting will take place in Dubai. And of course, people are not happy with that. And some member of parliament in Strasbourg, in the EU, but also in Washington, wrote a letter saying that it's not normal, we should remove him from this position. The one member of the government in Emirates make a tough comment saying that it's enough that the European go in Africa and tell them what to do. It's enough. So you see, yes, people are reacting.
Do you think these COP meetings are going to just keep going on for more decades, or at some point are they going to just stop?
I wrote an article a few years ago. I think it was before Glasgow, I think, or Glasgow, saying, should we wait COP 99 to stop to organize COPs? Because it's a failure, of course. If we had 28% of 27 COPs and the CO2 emission have increased by 60%, of course it's a failure. So it's like the algae and the biofuel that we were mentioning. You try, you see that it's not working, please stop.
I hope it does. I hope it does stop. I think I will read yet another great quote from your book, if you will bear with me here. Since 1900, extreme poverty has been reduced by a factor of 7, and weather-related mortality by a factor of 50. All this while the temperature has risen 1.3 degrees centigrade. Objectively, there is no reason to believe that if the temperature continues to rise, either naturally or because of our CO2 emissions, an apocalypse will occur. That is not rational. If people want to apply the precautionary principle, they should not return to the living conditions of a century ago by abandoning the abundant and cheap energy of conventional energy, but adapt gradually to reality as changes occur, end quote. I think that's one of the more sane paragraphs I've heard. Do you have any additional comments on that one of yours?
Yes, I think that we should not be desperate if the temperature increase, whatever the cause of the increase. We had never had so much capacity and resilience capacity to any type of event. When there is a storm in Philippines, there is a disaster because houses are built with in a totally inefficient way. But the same storm in one island of France, like La Réunion or others, do not provoke the death. Why? Because they have good houses. The same storm, if you have a house built on concrete, resists. If it is with wood, it does not resist. So the capacity to resist depends of the richness of people. Because people which are poor cannot build, they do not have resilience. So the aim should be to increase the richness of people. Because if you are becoming rich, you are more resilient, but also, and that's, I think, something that I like very much, if you are becoming rich, you take care of environment. If you are poor, you have not the means and not even the willingness to address the problem of the nature. The Maslow pyramid of needs show that we need to fulfill our basic needs before we arrive to the summit of the pyramid, where we can sing outside and say, know that I have everything, what I'm going to do. And it's important that we continue to bring prosperity to all citizens of the world in order that they pay attention to the environment. Where it is better to live, in New York or in Kinshasa? Where people take more care of environment, in New York or in Kinshasa or Calcutta or whatever? So yes, we need to protect the environment, of course, but the possibility to protect the environment depend not of the regression, but of the progression.
Very good. A related quote is here I'm going to read from you. A quote, if you're poor and hungry, you don't care what the temperature will be in 2100, especially if it's calculated by a computer. One should always be wary of utopias. Tackling man-made climate change will ultimately lead to controlling people's lives, end quote. And that's a big one for me. I don't know if you have a lot of thoughts on controlling our lives using central bank digital currency and all that type of thing.
Richard Lidson, who was a member of IPCC, and a brilliant scientist, said that if you control carbon, you control life. And this is what is occurring for time being in Europe, at least, because they are controlling completely the way of life of people through taxes, limitation, targets. And at the end, this will trigger a reaction from citizens, because if we see that the CO2 increase everywhere in the world, and we are private of liberty in the EU, people will react. You know, there is a French. It is presented as a scientist, but it's an ideologist. A French guy, which have said that we should have 4 flights right during the life. He didn't precise that if it is 4 return flight or 2 for one direction. So you see, they are thinking to limit the number of flights that you are going to take. So I think that we are in a very Soviet type society if we don't react.
But I don't understand, in democratic countries, how can this happen? Like, what % of the people that are voting really want their flights to be limited and want their thermostats to be controlled outside of their home? There must be some sort of rise of politicians who will take the side of the people and push back against this. Are you seeing that at all?
Yes, Tom, that is a very good question. Since 2-3 months, I use an expression, the ecologist of all parties. Because sometimes we say the ecologists are saying, and now I'm saying the ecologist of all parties, because you will find ecologists in all parties, extreme left and also extreme right, not in the same proportion, but there is people who are believing that we are in a collapsed society and that we need to react, and they accommodate that according to their political vision. But those people represent a few percentage, maybe 7-8%, no more. But they are so able to communicate, and they have the megaphone of the media that everybody talk about them. And they've been able to push the politicians and even the Exxon and the other industry in a direction to be green and to talk green and to think green and to eat green. That's not democracy. It's why I'm telling you, I told you that it's possible that in 1 year time, something will change. Because it is a minority, active minority, but a minority. And therefore, at the end, the population will not accept. You know, when you are in an airport and you see the number of people in the airport, the plane which are full, can you imagine that people have to take 4 times the airplane? It's not possible. Of course, it will not be acceptable.
Okay, that encourages me. So maybe the reason that ordinary people aren't pushing back as much is that they're just not really paying attention. And for now, they are allowed to fly as much as they want. But as soon as it actually happens and impinges on their lives, then they're going to say, no way, we're not doing this. Yeah.
You know, in Europe, we suffer much more than in USA for the price of energy because of last year. And in the middle of this crisis, of increase of price of energy, the ecologists of all the parties in Strasbourg decide that in 2027, we will have a tax for eating. You imagine? So if you take your shower with hot water, you will pay a tax. It's a law. It's not yet applied. It will be in 27. But when people will understand what they are preparing, of course they will react. Who can afford to pay a tax on an energy which is very, very expensive already, just to save the planet? No, there will be, of course, there will be a reaction.
So that tax on eating, is it in the form of just a generic carbon tax, or there's a special tax on meat because meat causes more bad weather than vegetables, or what is it?
Yes, but it did, as Dick Lindzen say, if you control carbon, you control life, but you control all your expenditure, food, travel, eating, everything depends on energy, so they will tax everything.
So, I'm curious.
Food, including meat. Do you know that they want also to limit the number of coal? They say that we should limit the number of coal because coal are producing methane, and there was a strong reaction by the farmer in Netherlands. They created a new party to react to that, and it has been a big surprise. It was local election, but it was a big surprise to see that a non-existing party before the election grows so much because people say, okay, we cannot accept to kill our cows because we want to save the planet. Of course not.
How about the whole idea of seizing farms? Because farms cause bad weather. The government's going to seize farms in the Netherlands, and I don't know where else. Is that actually happening? That farms are going into governmental control because of climate reasons?
Yes, at least there is a proposal. The vice president of the commission, the Dutch socialist Frans Timmermans, has proposed a strategy from farm to fork, controlling all the food chain from the farmer to the table, to the fork, and they are inventing new legislation, but countries are reacting because the farmer will not accept that, and there are also technical aspects that demonstrated that this is not the real problem we have to face with. So yes, the farmers are starting to organize themselves and will not accept just to be killed by politicians.
You have traveled around Europe a lot recently, it sounds like, and I'm curious as to when you talk to ordinary people, are they all in on the climate scam? Like it comes up a lot in ordinary conversation. Weather's getting worse. We got to change our lifestyle to prevent bad weather. Is that a thing you hear?
I hear only that, but this is not representative because I'm not invited by the Greens. But I'm invited in many different type of setting. And I have to say that the most important thing is that people are naive about all this. They ignore the reality. That's my main conclusion. They do not know. They just listen to the media, to the green advertisement, and so they believe it. But if you take time to explain them the reality, then of course they do not accept this. And I see that at each conference, each meeting is always the same thing. People say, why are we not aware of this? That's a question. Why people are not aware of the real situation? Why people are not aware that the CO2 emissions have increased by 60% since the moment we say that we want to reduce it? Why people which are seeing windmill and solar panel everywhere in each corner of Europe are not aware that this is just 3%? See? And of course, once you explain that you pay a lot, there is a risk, and you buy Chinese for 3%, people say, oh, it's enough.
So you're spreading the sanity yourself. Are you going around and speaking to the general public a lot?
I'm doing that regularly, very regularly. This Saturday, I've done that to a monastery. I've been invited by monks
Really?
in the Belgian Ardennes to talk about that to religious people. They want to understand. They were really genuine. They want to learn. If you want to learn, of course, it's evident that this is wrong. So yes, I try to do my best to share the words. I'm retired. I'm not working. I'm retired. I'm not. I refuse to make the lobbyist. I refuse to make the consultant, and so I'm free, and I enjoy to share what I've learned in my professional life.
That's encouraging that you were invited to speak. So, are you generally received as, or do people actually listen to you? They don't treat you like a demon from hell or something because you're saying this stuff. Yeah.
No, I'm invited regularly. I even need to refuse because it's impossible to fit everything. But I'm constantly invited in all parts of Europe to talk. Yes.
Do you have people picketing or trying to prevent you from talking or talking over you, anything like that, or?
Yes, but not actively. For example, to this monk meeting, one person wrote them saying, "Why do you invite him?" And the monk answered, "But please come and listen, you will see." And he didn't came. So yes, of course, there are people who are not pleased that I'm speaking. But due that I'm not a consultant, due that I'm not a politician, well, it's difficult to stop me because I have no vested interest.
Very good. Do you have any advice for the rest of us on what we should be doing to spread the word that we're not doing?
Learn. I'm working a lot. I'm learning every day on the new reality everywhere. You need to be aware of what happens yesterday to be credible, and to share the word and accept to go to speak to a group of people. Sometimes I'm going to a house group, just a few people in a house that want to learn. But sometimes I speak to 100 people, 1,000 people, sorry. It depends. You should never refuse to speak and share the world, and don't be afraid to say that the reality, because people do, people are accepting the green dogma without knowing, just because it's sympathetic. But if you start to explain them that you need to protect the environment, but not to destroy our wealthy situation, people will accept. Of course, we need to protect the environment. You see, they are playing game with environment and climate, but it's not the same. We need to protect the environment. Of course, who want to live in a polluted world? Nobody. So protection of environment, full steam, but trying to limit the CO2 emission in order to avoid to increase the increase of temperature. Why? If it is not sure, it is anyway inefficient, and we are able to cope.
All right. Yeah, I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm happy that I'm seeing a lot of people I had not seen before, that they're becoming well-informed skeptics, and they're pushing back on Twitter. I'm loving that. Yeah. But I think we should supplement that by in real life, as we're talking to people in real life. If it comes up, I think it is important for us to do what you're doing and share it even to small groups or big groups. And just on a retail level, I think we can make a huge difference.
Yes. Because we are numerous, We are not a few exalted people. No, we are a lot of people, a lot of scientists. The problem is that a lot of scientists do not dare to speak until retirement, because they need to work. They do not want to be put aside because they just mentioned something which is not politically correct.
So I do think that informed climate skeptics are way more numerous now than 20 years ago. You go back 20 years and I was on the other side. I was believing this stuff. There's a lot of us, Tony Heller, I think, Anthony Watts. There's a lot of people who are now skeptics who have dug into it. But 20 years ago, I think there were way less. I don't know if that agrees with your experience.
25 years ago, I was working myself on climate change.
There you go. Yeah.
25 years ago, I negotiated the Kyoto Protocol. I developed a lot of technologies to impose climate change to cities and regions, and to promote renewable flows. Yes, I have. Until the moment I realized that it is totally insufficient and useless, because people in the world will continue to use conventional energy. And so, yes, a lot of people are moving from one side to the other, but more and more. The proof that we are more active and numerous than in the past is that we are much more attacked. Until last year, for example, people, the green and the media were ignoring the guy like us, just ignoring. They do not exist. And now they try to criticize us much more openly. Why? Because they realize that we have a point and that we develop more and more. Yes, of course. It's evident that there is no legislative means to reduce CO2 emission. That's a bureaucratic dream to impose by legislation, regulation, the reduction of the temperature of the globe. This is ridiculous.
What was a major factor that turned you personally from your beliefs as of 25 years ago to what they are now in terms of climate?
The people I met. I met people which I realized progressively that they were not scientists, they were ideologists, and they had either agenda. It's because I was working with them that I start to become skeptic. Those people have another agenda. Indeed, what they want is to get rid with the market economy and to impose a socialist vision to the society. There was a Brazilian unionist, Chico Mendes, who said that climate change without social control, without the control of society, is gardening. It's a nice sentence. Just dealing, for those people from who want to control life, if you deal with climate change, but you don't want to change the society, that means to have a socialist society, this is gardening. So the final aim is that, to have a social justice. And you see that the word social justice is coming more and more in the language. It's social justice. Climate change is for a just society. The Prime Minister of France, Mrs. Elisabeth Borne, asked to an official of the government, the French administration, to make a study on what to do to ensure the energy transition. And the report concludes that people will not accept it because it's touching their life. And because people will not accept it, we need to impose it by government. Government have to take the control of life. And because all this will be expensive, government should take a part of the money of the wealthy. Not a tax. It's not a tax. They should take the part of the money to pay the energy transition. So you see, nothing to do with climate change here. It's just a socialist vision. A former Minister of Energy in Belgium, which is presently the president of the Socialist Party in Belgium, the 9th of June, introduced a request to the European Commission to tax the wealthy, to pay for the energy transition. So they are becoming much more aggressive on this, saying they are not stupid. With 3% of renewable, they know that it's not working. So they want to take the money to people which have money to give it to the energy transition. The fact is, you doesn't know where the wealthy vector is. Who is the wealthy?
So I think it's interesting that you brought up this emphasis on social justice, because just yesterday, Greta Thunberg retweeted this thing. It's a week of action for social and climate justice. I think it's just so interesting that they listed social first. Like climate is the most important thing ever, but now they're not even hiding the fact that it's about social justice. Yeah,
it's social justice. It's socialism which is coming back in another way. It's just that. For generation, at least in Europe, generation of people were really thinking with their hearts to be socialist or communist for social justice. It's in the society in Europe. Therefore, everything dealing with market is bad. And the collapse of the Soviet Union has been a trauma for them, because they understood that the Soviet Union was a total failure on all aspects. But they've still, in their heart, the willingness to get rid of the market economy. And so they reshaped completely the concept with degrowth to save the planet. Because then if you degrowth, you penalize the market economy. and the oil companies, which are always always the best enemies of the socialists.
Okay. Any other points you'd like to make before we go ahead and wrap up?
We didn't mention hydrogen.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
I made my PhD in using hydrogen because if you want to transform coal into liquids, you need hydrogen. And therefore, I work a lot on hydrogen also in the European Commission. It's interesting to know that in 1960, the European Commission started to work on hydrogen production. And the idea at that time was that in the 60s, there will be so much nuclear development that we should use nuclear energy not only for electricity purpose, but also for the other purpose of the energy, transport and heating in domestic or industrial. And so researchers in the European Commission Center start to look at hydrogen as a natural way to think that we have the nuclear energy, we can use it to produce hydrogen, which is not an energy, but is a vector of energy. And then with this, do other type of energy. And rapidly, they realized that they should not dream about electrolysis of water. It's totally nonsense, insane to think that you produce hydrogen with electrolysis of water for chemical reason or thermodynamic reason, let's say. It costs too much in energy. Breaking a water molecule costs 7 times more than breaking a methane molecule to produce 1 unit of hydrogen, 7 times more. Therefore, they say we need to find another way. And they work on high temperature gas nuclear reactor, trying to have very high temperature with nuclear reactor to break down the molecule, not by electricity, but by heat. And they work on that and for decades, and they say at the end, what we need if we want to have hydrogen, we need a new type of nuclear reactor. But then Germany didn't want to listen about nuclear energy, and this idea fell down. But because Germans need a solution for their wind and solar intermittency, they took the rabbit of hydrogen in the hat, and they say, oh, this is the solution, hydrogen. But the Commission is working since 1960 on that. And there is nothing new. But they need a new solution, you know. The 3%, I repeat, the 3% is not sufficient. So they need new solution, and they invented the hydrogen. So I've been very shocked when in July 2020, the European Commission proposed a strategy on hydrogen. And in a few weeks, less than 1 month, I've wrote a book on hydrogen, The Hydrogen Illusion, where I explain all the aspects of the hydrogen production, consumption, with the complete history of what happens in the European Commission on hydrogen. So I still believe that there is no future for hydrogen as a form of energy. Of course, hydrogen is the chemical base of the industry. All the chemical industry, petrochemical industry depend on hydrogen. And so we need hydrogen. We produce for time being 130 million tons of hydrogen, but for chemical purpose. And to burn it is like eating your house in burning Louis Vuitton handbag. Nonsense. It's nonsense to burn hydrogen. It's a precious molecule. So this is something which is quite disappointing to see my own institution, which have worked so much on hydrogen and now neglecting 60 years of research of a nice, bright researcher in the Commission.
What do you think might be the most promising solution for a liquid fuel to a power jet 200 years from now?
Kerosene. Kerosene. All the rest is a nonsense. They want to produce e-fuels with hydrogen and CO2. CO2 is the tailpipe of our life. If you want to transform CO2 into a fuel, you need to give the same energy that is liberated when you burn a fuel to produce CO2. The law is named Gibbs, the law of Gibbs. The energy that you liberate in burning a fuel, if you want with the fumes, the CO2, to rebuild the fuel, you need to add the same quantity of energy, plus the inefficiency of the process. That means that to produce e-fuel, you need to give a lot of energy, but we do not have energy. So we are inventing a problem which need energy. No sense. I told you that I'm a chemical engineer, and I cannot accept this type of statement.
Okay, but we will still have kerosene in 200 years? We're not going to run out. I don't really know, of course.
We don't know what will happen in 200 years. I think one thing is sure. Mankind is bright. And the resilience and the capacity of innovation is increasing. Climate change have not changed the intelligence of people. And therefore, in 200 years, we will be more clever than, not more clever, but more able to cope with problems. And there will be solutions. Whatever solution, I don't know. But I think that the final energy will be the nuclear energy. The potential of development of nuclear energy is extremely high. We are only at the beginning of the surprise in the energy sector, in the nuclear sector. This is also one of the reasons why the Green do not like nuclear energy, because nuclear energy is nearly an infinite type of energy. And if it is infinite, you cannot control life of people. No, I believe strongly that in the future, fossil fuel will remain for a while. Solar energy can do something also, but if it is in backup of the massive development of nuclear.
Very good. All right. Any other things any other points you'd like to make before we wrap up?
No, I'm very pleased that you raise a lot of interesting questions, which are not always the case, because we focus too much on some technical aspect, and here we had also some moral consideration, which is important also.
All right. Yeah, I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you very much for taking the time, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you, Tom.
All right.
Goodbye to all.
All right. Talk to you next time. Samuele Furfari. Goodbye.